Jaime Lannister's story begins long before steel first touched his hand, long before the white cloak ever settled on his shoulders. It begins in the echoing stone corridors of Casterly Rock, that ancient fortress carved into the bones of the mountain overlooking the sunset sea. To be born a Lannister was to inherit more than gold, more than legacy. It was to carry the weight of a roaring lion on one's back, a symbol at once beautiful and crushing. For Jaime, that weight arrived early, shaping him in ways even he would not understand until much later in life. He and his twin sister Cersei entered the world together, a single birth split into two souls. The masters whispered it was an omen, and Lady Joanna smiled as if she knew some secret truth. For the brief years she lived, she anchored the twins with warmth and gentleness, qualities seldom found in their father, Tywin Lannister. But her death, when the twins were still children, created a void, a cold abscess in the heart of Casterly Rock that would widen into a chasm. Tywin became harder, more relentless, more determined that his children would reflect the grandeur of House Lannister in all things. Cersei responded with ambition. Jaime responded with talent. Jaime grew quickly into his strength. By 10, his sword master declared that the boy needed a better teacher. By 11, he had defeated squires older and broader than himself. Tywin watched from the shadows of the training yard with his arms crossed, offering no praise, only expectation. A Lannister must be the best, he said once, when Jaime asked whether he had fought well. Anything less makes us look weak. Jaime did not ask again. Despite the stern discipline, life within Casterly Rock still held moments of warmth. Jaime and Cersei were near inseparable, an intimacy that grew out of shared childhood loneliness, shared burden, and a mirrored life that made it feel as if each completed the other. They had the same face, the same hair, the same laughter, and eventually the same forbidden secret. Even as young teenagers, they understood the danger of their closeness, yet neither wished to break it. It was a secret not born of lust alone, but of identity. Without her, he did not feel whole. Without him, she felt no power. This bond, forbidden and absolute, would shape every choice Jaime ever made. His martial excellence did not go unnoticed outside of Casterly Rock. Lords whispered of the prodigy in the west, the boy whose sword flashed like sunlight on gold. Tywin saw in Jaime more than potential. He saw legacy. When Jaime was around 14, Tywin began quietly arranging for him to inherit not just the wealth of Lannister lands, but their political influence. At his father's side, Jaime attended councils, listened to matters of taxation, mining disputes, and fealty negotiations. Even then, his father was grooming him to be the future lord of Casterly Rock. But Cersei had other dreams. She wanted Jaime beside her forever, and she believed the path to that future ran through the Iron Throne. She convinced herself that she and Jaime were destined to rule together, two halves of one golden whole. When Tywin served as the hand of King Aerys II, Targaryen, Cersei secretly entertained the idea that she and Jaime might one day be king and queen. A prophecy had seeded this hope in her youth, though Jaime never learned the details, and she clung to Jaime as the one constant in a world full of shifting courts and dangerous alliances. It was around this time, when Jaime was 15, that a great shock rippled outward from King's Landing. Princess Alia's maiden brother, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, defeated every knight at the tourney at Storm's End, before yielding the victory to a young Kingsguard knight, Sir Arthur Dane, who then recommended Jaime as a potential squire. The honour was enormous, and Tywin could scarcely hide his pride. The potential was clear, a path into the highest ranks of knighthood. Jaime trained under Dane briefly thereafter, squired at Summerhall, and during those weeks he learned what true mastery of the blade looked like. Elegance fused with precision, strength fused with humility. Jaime idolized Dane more than any man he ever encountered. Tywin's ambitions for Jaime continued to grow. By the time the boy reached 16, Tywin began pressing the idea of a match between his son and Lisa Tully, a betrothal that would strengthen ties between the Riverlands and the West. Jaime, however, felt a tremor of dread at the prospect. Cersei's influence loomed large, and she urged him not to accept any betrothal. She whispered to him that they belonged only to each other. Any marriage would tear them apart. Jaime, drawn by love deeper than reason, agreed, but fate intervened in the form of King Aerys II, Targaryen. The Mad King, paranoid and increasingly unstable, learned through court whispers that Tywin planned to marry Jaime to Lysa Tully. Aerys despised the idea of Tywin expanding his power at court, and he saw an opportunity to strike a petty blow. He announced, without warning, that Jaime Lannister would be made a knight of the Kingsguard. For a young knight, it was the highest honour imaginable. For Tywin, it was a political assassination. A Kingsguard takes no lands, no titles, no heirs. With a single decree, Aerys had stolen Tywin's legacy from him and trapped Jaime in service to the throne forever. Jaime, who had first felt the thrill of honour, soon realised the cost. Cersei was devastated, Tywin was humiliated, and Jaime, though sworn to a noble brotherhood, found himself chained to a madman. Still, he clung to one hope. Serving in the Kingsguard kept him near Cersei in King's Landing. She convinced him that this was not the end of their bond, but its strengthening, that even the gods had chosen him for her. Life under Aerys was not what Jaime expected. The Mad King trusted no one, not even his white-cloaked protectors. He whispered to pyromancers, hoarded wildfire, watched people burn with unsettling fascination. Jaime, who had imagined heroism and noble deeds, instead bore silent witness to cruelty he could not stop. He saw Lord Chelstead burned alive. He saw Aerys order his own hand, Tywin, to kneel publicly as if he were a commoner. He heard the screams of women in Aerys's custody. Jaime's oath bound his hands while his conscience frayed. Rhaegar, by contrast, treated Jaime with respect. The prince understood Jaime's disillusionment and spoke to him often about a future where the realm might be healed from Aerys's madness. Jaime admired Rhaegar, perhaps even loved him in a knightly, idealistic way. The prince embodied the virtues Jaime thought knighthood stood for. But as Rhaegar withdrew from public life, consumed by prophecy and the turmoil that led to the tourney of Harrenhal, Jaime became increasingly isolated within the Kingsguard. When Rhaegar died on the Trident, the world shifted. The whispers of rebellion became thunder. Robert Baratheon's victory tore the Targaryen dynasty apart, and King's Landing trembled as Tywin Lannister, long spurned and insulted by Aerys, finally marched his armies toward the capital. Inside the Red Keep, panic spread. Aerys demanded wildfire caches be lit beneath the city. A final act of destruction to incinerate every man, woman, and child if the rebels breached the walls. He ordered his pyromancers to ignite the wildfire the moment the gates fell. "Burn them all," he commanded. "Burn every one of them." Jaime understood then that the oath he had taken was impossible to uphold if it required protecting a butcher who meant to slaughter 500,000 innocents. The Kingsguard stood for honor, but what honor existed in obeying a mad tyrant who demanded mass murder? When Tywin's armies entered the city under the guise of allegiance, Aerys's own guards abandoned him. The Mad King screamed for Jaime to bring him Tywin's head, and then to ignite the wildfire. Jaime chose in that moment the path that would define him forever, the path that would stain him with a name he despised, yet preserve a realm that would never thank him for it. He drove his sword through the pyromancer first, ending the threat of wildfire. Then he ascended the Iron Throne and slew Aerys himself. It was not an act of glory, nor vengeance, nor ambition. It was necessity, it was mercy, it was survival. But when Eddard Stark entered the throne room to see Jaime seated upon the Iron Throne, sword in hand and the Mad King dead at his feet, he saw only hubris and treachery. The truth of that moment, the truth of the boy who saved the city, would rot unspoken for nearly 20 years. Tywin arrived soon after, victorious, cold, and proud. He saw the white cloak and understood the cost of Aerys's betrayal. He also saw how the realm now viewed his son, a Kingslayer, an oath-breaker, a man without honor. Tywin never corrected them. He never defended Jaime. It served his purposes too well that the world thought his son dangerous, untrustworthy, tainted. A Lannister punishes insult with silent, calculated vengeance. And Jaime, knowingly or not, became an instrument of that vengeance. In the early days of Robert Baratheon's reign, Jaime learned what it meant to be reviled despite righteousness. He sat on the Kingsguard with men who whispered behind his back. He protected a king who mocked him openly, who saw him as Tywin's golden boy. He drifted through life with the bitter knowledge that his greatest act of courage had earned him only scorn. His only refuge was Cersei, familiar, intoxicating, dangerous. She told him that the world did not deserve the truth. She told him that honor was a lie, that only power mattered. Jaime clung to her words because they eased the emptiness. He clung to her because deep down, he still believed they were destined for each other. Years passed. The realm forgot the details of Aerys's madness, but remembered Jaime's blade, the Kingslayer, oathbreaker, a man with no honor. Those whispers followed him like a shadow, even as he served faithfully, even as his skill with the sword stayed unmatched. Jaime laughed them off in public, projecting arrogance as armor. Inside, he remained the young knight who had once believed in heroes. And then came the fateful royal procession north to Winterfell, the journey that would awaken old wounds, ignite new conflicts, and draw Jaime Lannister into the storm that would reshape the entire Seven Kingdoms, beginning with a single, reckless moment atop a broken tower, and the echo of Bran Stark's fall into the quiet snow below. The royal procession to Winterfell began under bright southern sun, but for Jaime Lannister, it felt more like a march into memory. King Robert Baratheon, broad, loud, already softening from drink and excess, insisted on visiting Eddard Stark personally to name him Hand of the King. Cersei rode near the front, poised and elegant as a queen should be, her green eyes sharp as a blade whenever she surveyed the world around her. Jaime rode beside the Kingsguard column, armoured in gold and white, as flawless and distant as a statue. Only a few miles from King's Landing, the court began its usual gossip. Whispers flowed like river currents of Jon Arryn's sudden death, of tensions between North and South, of old wounds that never healed. Jaime paid little mind to them. He spent most of the ride watching Robert and his sister, noting the quiet hostility between them. Robert's disdain for Cersei had grown obvious over the years. The king lusted after his hunts and wine more than his marriage. Cersei responded with cold dignity, a queen in truth, if not in affection. Jaime remained her shadow, her confidant, her weapon, though now he sensed a new bitterness in her gaze, a dissatisfaction that ran deeper than Robert's neglect alone. Upon arriving in Winterfell, Jaime dismounted before the great grey castle of the Starks. The north felt heavy with chill even in early autumn, its air thick with solemnity. Winterfell's walls were immense, ancient stone weathered by thousands of years. There's something primitive about it, Cersei mused beside him, her voice soft, as if the Stark ancestral stronghold offended her sense of refinement. Jaime hid a smirk. The Starks lived by honour, the Lannisters lived by power. Two worlds destined to clash. Inside the yard, King Robert embraced Eddard Stark with booming laughter, a sound that seemed too large for the quiet people of the north. Ned Stark's eyes flicked to Jaime briefly, a look still shaped by what he had seen in the throne room so many years ago. Even after all this time, Jaime could read the skepticism plainly. To Ned, he was still the Kingslayer. The stain had not faded. Jaime met his gaze with an easy smile, the smile he used as armour. He toured Winterfell with the King's party, finding himself intrigued by the Stark children. Robb, serious beyond his years. Sansa, polite and court-trained. Arya, wild with curiosity. Bran, the climber. Bran especially drew his attention, scrambling up walls and towers with an agility that reminded Jaime of his own restless youth. Cersei frowned every time she saw the boy scaling heights. "Someone will get hurt," she muttered. Jaime brushed it off as Cersei's general anxiety around things she could not control. The days passed in ceremonial greetings, feasts, and politicking. Robert shouted for more wine. Ned grumbled over Robert's lack of discipline. Cersei maneuvered with careful steps, maintaining grace while keeping her distance from both Stark and Baratheon alike. Jaime spent much of his time observing the court's shifting alliances. Winterfell was peaceful on the surface, yet beneath that peace, Jaime sensed undercurrents of tension. Jon Arryn's death had unsettled the realm in ways few yet understood. One afternoon, while the castle bustled with preparations for the royal feast, Cersei led Jaime into a vacant tower chamber. The privacy felt rare and dangerous, They spoke quietly at first, discussing the tedium of court life, the responsibilities expected of a queen, the weight of a Kingsguard's oath. But their hands found each other as they always had, their bodies drawn together by a bond older than reason. They had stolen moments like this throughout their lives, but Winterfell, alien, cold, stark, felt like a riskier stage. It was in this stolen moment of closeness that fate dealt its blow. The door creaked. Small footsteps pattered. Bran Stark climbed the tower wall with the ease of a cat, drawn by curiosity and adventure. He peered through the window, and in that instant, the world froze. Cersei gasped. Jaime turned. Bran stared, confused and terrified. "He saw us," Cersei whispered. Jaime felt his heart snap like a bowstring. He saw, in a dizzy flash, the consequences. Cersei ruined, their children condemned, House Lannister torn apart by scandal. The boy stood on the ledge, dangerously high above the courtyard. "The things I do for love," Jaime said. A sentence that would echo through the kingdoms long after. Then he pushed Bran from the tower. The fall seemed endless. A sickening silence followed. Cersei clung to Jaime in fear, and though neither spoke, both understood that the fate of their house now hung on the boy's survival, or lack of it. They left the tower chamber separately, maintaining the facade of royal composure. But something inside Jaime had shifted. He had killed many men in war, but he had never harmed a child. And though he had acted to protect everything he loved, the act gnawed at him. Days passed with slow dread. Bran hovered between life and death. The Starks held vigil. The North buzzed with suspicion. Cersei played the grieving queen in public, but in private she was tense, furious, terrified. Jaime tried to appear calm, yet every breath he drew felt weighted by guilt and anticipation of discovery. The feast that followed Robert's acceptance of Ned Stark as hand did nothing to ease tensions. Robert grew loud and impatient. Cersei grew cold and calculating. When Ned's wife, Catelyn Stark, received sudden news implicating a Lannister dagger in Bran's near murder, she quietly left Winterfell, an act that would ripple outward with devastating consequences. Jaime did not yet know of the accusation when he departed Winterfell with the king's party. The journey back south was uneasy, the road filled with rumours and the silent strain between Stark and Lannister. When the king ordered his party to stop in the Riverlands for rest, word finally reached Jaime. Catelyn Stark had seized Tyrion on the King's Road, accusing him of sending an assassin to kill her son. Jaime's fury ignited instantly. Tyrion, clever, wounded by the world, harmless to children, had always held a complicated but real place in Jaime's heart. He was the only Lannister who dared speak openly, without fear, without mask. Jaime's protectiveness rose like fire, and without warning, he confronted Ned Stark in the streets of King's Landing upon their return. The confrontation escalated swiftly. Jaime demanded Tyrion's release. Ned insisted Tyrion had been taken north under Catelyn's authority. Soldiers drew steel. Words turned to violence. The duel that followed was brief but fierce, each man fighting with skill honed over decades. Jaime relished the challenge. Ned resisted with grim determination. Their clash ended only when one of the king's guards stabbed Ned's leg from behind, an act Jaime had not ordered. Disgusted, Jaime withdrew instantly. He sheathed his sword, glared at the offending guardsman, and commanded his men to stand down. Whatever his reputation, Jaime cared little for dishonourable strikes. But the damage was done. Ned Stark lay wounded. The Starks were insulted, the Lannisters outraged, and Tyrion was still held captive somewhere in the mountains of the Vale. The realm teetered toward war. Robert, who cared more for feast than politics, tried to smooth over the incident with bluster and indifference. But Jaime could not forgive the injury to his brother, nor the disrespect shown to House Lannister. He led a company of men into the Riverlands to search for Tyrion, but instead found only rising hostility among the houses loyal to Tully and Stark. Although the King's Peace nominally protected all men, every house was arming quietly, preparing for the inevitable. Catelyn Stark's decision to seize Tyrion had set fire to the tinder of old grievances. Hostilities boiled over when Lannister forces under Sir Gregor Clegane began burning villages in the Riverlands, justified as retaliation for the attack on Tyrion. In truth, Tywin Lannister used the unrest as an excuse to test the North and the Tullys, gauging their readiness for war. Jaime found himself caught in the storm his family had stirred, obligated to fight, but weary of the consequences. When war finally broke out, Jaime commanded a sizable Lannister host against the forces of the Riverlands. His brilliance in battle shone as brightly as any knight in Westeros. He defeated Edmure Tully on the field with ruthless efficiency, capturing the heir to River Run and scattering the Tully defenders. But he also knew that this war was no mere campaign of strategy. It was a tangle of personal vendettas, wounded honour, and political manoeuvring. Even so, he played his part, because he was a Lannister, and Lannisters repay every slight. The deeper conflict emerged when Robb Stark, Ned's eldest son, marched south with a northern army to confront the Lannisters. Jaime met the young wolf in battle at the Whispering Wood, unaware that Robb had outmaneuvered him with tactics far beyond his years. Jaime charged headlong into the forest with his elite cavalry, expecting to shatter northern morale as he had done to so many others. Instead, he rode into a trap. Northern soldiers fell upon his men from all sides. War horns bellowed, trees echoed with shouts and steel. In the swirling chaos, Jaime fought fiercely, cutting through foes with precision and fury. But even his unmatched skill could not turn the tide. One by one his men fell. The northern forces closed in. At last, surrounded, exhausted and bleeding, Jaime surrendered. It was the first time in his life he had been defeated so thoroughly. Robb Stark took him prisoner, a prize that electrified the realm. Jaime, the Kingslayer, the golden son of Tywin Lannister, now sat in chains at River Run, watched day and night by Stark and Tully guards. The world saw his capture as justice, retribution for Bran's fall, for Ned's wounding, for every sin the Starks believed he had committed. The North celebrated, the Riverlands rejoiced. Jaime, however, did not bother with despair. He sat in darkness, shackled, amused by the irony. The realm called him without honour, yet here he was, held captive for an accusation he had never answered and a truth he had never spoken. He had saved a kingdom from wildfire, and in return branded a monster. He had acted for love, and in return, he was hated. He had served his king, and in return, he had been mocked. In that cell, Jaime began to understand that the world's judgment of him had never been about truth, but about narrative. And the Starks had written him into their story as the villain. Yet the tale of Jaime Lannister was far from finished. Somewhere beyond Riverrun's coalstone walls, war still raged. Tyrion fought to survive. Cersei played her own dangerous games in King's Landing. And Tywin Lannister, relentless as ever, prepared to move heaven and earth to retrieve his captured son. Jaime waited in solitude, knowing rescue would come, though not in the form he expected, and not without carving a wound that would shape the next chapter of his life more deeply than any blade ever could. Riverrun's stone walls pressed down on Jaime like a tomb. The cell was small, damp, and lit only by a narrow barred window that offered a sliver of sky. For months, he endured the monotony of captivity, the stale bread, the mocking guards, the endless muttering of other prisoners echoing through the darkness. He had lived a life of prestige and motion, a life where steel sang in his hand and the world bowed before his arrogance. Now iron chains bit into his wrists, and silence became his only companion. He amused himself at first. He taunted the guards, provoked duels he could not win while bound, and laughed in the faces of men who despised him. But as time stretched, even his defiance dulled. Jaime realized something he had not truly faced before. Without a sword, without freedom, without Cersei, who was far away in King's Landing, he was vulnerable. He felt the truth of it deep in his chest, a truth that tasted bitter. His only pleasant visitor was Catelyn Stark. When she came to his cell late one night, face drawn with grief from the news of her dead husband and missing daughters, Jaime sensed opportunity. She wanted answers. Who tried to kill her son? Who pushed Bran? But Jaime answered with sarcasm, truth disguised in jest, and sharp-edged honesty that offered no comfort. He did not deny he pushed Bran. He did not confirm it either. Catelyn struck him for his insolence, yet something in her eyes shifted when he spoke of the world's hypocrisy. There are no men of honor, he said, only men. Men who have lied and killed and broken oaths because it was necessary. Catelyn left shaken, and Jaime remained, shackled in the dark, wondering whether his honesty was bravery or simply a wounded man's confession. War continued to rage outside Riverrun. Word travelled slowly to Jaime, carried by guards who took pleasure in describing northern victories. Robb Stark became a legend, the young wolf, undefeated in battle, feared by Lannister men. Jaime imagined the boy commander, tall, fierce, relentless. He respected him, begrudgingly. The Starks had proven themselves formidable enemies. Weeks later, in the dead of night, Catelyn Stark returned once more. But this time, with keys in her hand, she had lost everything. Her husband murdered in King's Landing, her daughters taken, the realm fractured beyond recognition. With grief heavy in her heart, she made a desperate gamble. She freed Jaime in exchange for a vow that he would go north to trade himself for her daughters. Jaime swore the vow with solemnity, an oath given in desperation, but an oath nonetheless. It seemed a simple bargain, freedom for duty. But as he stepped into the cool night air outside River Run, chains removed, he understood the complexity of it. Honor demanded he fulfill that vow. Love demanded he return to Cersei. Survival demanded cunning. For the first time in years, Jaime confronted the weight of an oath, not as a king's guard, but as a man. Catelyn entrusted him to Brienne of Tarth, a woman unlike any he had ever known. Tall, broad-shouldered, clad in thick steel, she carried herself with a knight's bearing, though the world denied her that title. Jaime mocked her at first. He called her wench, taunted her appearance, and laughed at her unyielding sense of honor. But beneath the mockery lay something else. Fascination. Brienne believed in the very ideals Jaime had long abandoned. She believed oaths were sacred. She fought with purpose. She embodied the purity of knighthood he had once admired in Sir Arthur Dane. The journey through the Riverlands was perilous. The land had turned hostile, ravaged by both Lannister and Stark forces. Villages burned. Corpses hung from trees as warnings. The river ran dark with blood. Jaime and Brienne travelled through a country broken by war, a realm where ordinary people suffered for the ambitions of kings and lords. Jaime found himself thinking often of the wildfire beneath King's Landing, of the madness he had witnessed, of the way the realm misunderstood him. He wondered whether Brienne would hate him as deeply as the Starks if she knew the truth, that he had killed Aerys to save a city. But he said nothing. His silence was a shield, and his reputation a prison. Their first trials came quickly. They were hunted by Stark loyal forces, ambushed by sellswords, and harried by the remnants of northern scouts. Jaime was weakened by months in chains, but his instincts remained sharp. When he taunted Brienne into dueling him beside a quiet riverbank, she defeated him swiftly and decisively. The loss wounded him more deeply than he expected. His identity had always been tied to his blade. Without his full strength, he was vulnerable in ways he despised. But danger far greater than bandits awaited them. Locke and his mercenaries, brutal men sworn to House Bolton, captured Jaime and Brienne on the road. They bound them, beat them, mocked them. Jaime attempted to regain control through cunning words and promises of Lannister gold, but Locke saw through the veneer. He recognized pride when he saw it. He recognized arrogance, and he understood the perfect way to break both. Around a smoky campfire, Locke pressed a dirty blade against Jaime's neck. Jaime smirked even then, trying to bargain, trying to charm. He boasted of Tywin's riches, of Lannister power. He spoke as he always spoke, with confidence, with nonchalance, with the belief that words could prevent catastrophe. Locke smiled, and in a heartbeat, Jaime's world shattered. The blade came down in a flash. Pain exploded through his arm. Blood poured onto the dirt. His sword hand, the hand that had carried him through a lifetime of brilliance, the hand that had defined him, fell to the ground. The shock was greater than the agony. Jaime stared at the stump where his hand had been, unable to comprehend the truth. He screamed, not in fear, but in profound existential horror. Everything he had been was gone. He was no longer a knight. He was crippled, broken, worthless in the eyes of the realm. And in that moment, Jaime Lannister felt the first true taste of despair. Brienne watched him, her expression unreadable. She offered no pity, only a steady, solemn presence. In the days that followed, Jaime drifted between delirium and silence. He lost the arrogance that had once shielded him. He lost the swagger, the mockery, the smirk. He trembled with fever, with pain, with shame. Brienne cared for him as best she could, and in her calm, steady way, she kept him alive when he might have let himself fade. They escaped Locke's company only to be dragged as prisoners to Harrenhal, that colossal ruin where shadows clung to blackened stone like ghosts. There they encountered Lord Roose Bolton, cold and polite, a man whose gentleness felt like a blade hidden within silk. Roose returned Jaime to health, not out of kindness, but calculation. A crippled Lannister was worth more alive. Jaime bathed for the first time in weeks in Harrenhal's great stone tubs. Brienne joined him there, reluctantly, modestly, still bruised from her struggles. Their conversation began with hostility, but something shifted as steamy water blurred the edges of the dim room. The walls between them softened. Jaime, weakened by pain and the stripping of his identity, spoke without the mask he had worn all his life. He told her the truth. For the first time since the day King Aerys died, Jaime revealed what had really happened in the throne room. He spoke of the caches of wildfire hidden beneath the city, of Aerys's delusion, of his command to burn them all. He spoke of the pyromancer, of the screams, of the choice between honor and saving hundreds of thousands of innocent lives. "I slew the Mad King," Jaime whispered, voice raw, "to save a city that would never thank me. But they named me Kingslayer. They wanted the story to be simple." Brienne listened, the water rippling between them. In her eyes, Jaime saw no condemnation. He saw something far more painful, understanding. Her acceptance struck him harder than any blade. It was the first time in his life someone had truly seen him. From that moment, something inside Jaime shifted. Not completely, not instantly, but the foundation cracked, allowing something new to grow. A sense of purpose not rooted in love for Cersei or loyalty to Tywin, but in a desire, faint but genuine, to be better than the world believed him to be. When news came that Brienne would be thrown into the bear pit as sport, condemned to die for the amusement of monstrous men, Jaime acted without hesitation. Half-healed, unarmed, still reeling from the loss of his hand, he leapt into the pit beside her. Together they stared down the roaring beast as Harrenhal's men jeered from the stands. It was folly. It was madness. It was bravery. Jaime faced the bear not as the Kingslayer, not as Tywin's son, but as a man honouring the vow he made to Catelyn, and the silent bond he had formed with Brienne. Roose Bolton eventually halted the spectacle and allowed them both to live. But the moment had changed Jaime. He had risked everything, not for love, not for pride, but for honour. Real honour. The kind Brienne believed in. The kind he thought long dead within him. When Roose eventually allowed Jaime to leave Harrenhal and return to King's Landing, Jaime insisted Brienne accompany him. She still had a mission, to fulfill Catelyn's hope of bringing her daughters home. And Jaime had a mission of his own, to redefine what remained of himself. Their journey south was quieter than the one north. Jaime was weaker, slower, but more introspective. He spoke with Brienne not with mockery, but with curiosity. He wondered about her dreams, her childhood, her ideals, and he realized to his own surprise that Brienne of Tarth had become the first true friend he had ever known. When they reached the capital, the Red Keep loomed ahead, its towers gleaming in the dusk. King's Landing, the city he had saved, the city that feared him, the city that called him Kingslayer, awaited his return. He stepped through the gates, not as the Golden Knight he once was, but as a changed man, a broken man, a humbled man. Yet as he walked into the clamour of the capital, one truth burned within him. Jaime Lannister's story was not over. It had only just begun. King's Landing smelled of rot and heat the day Jaime returned. Not the rot of corpses, but the rot of politics, secrets, and a city overripe with tension. The Red Keep loomed like a cracked crown, its towers glowing orange in the sinking sun. For the first time in his life, Jaime hesitated at its gates. He had left this city a knight unequalled in skill, a swordsman praised by half the realm. Now he returned a cripple, his sword hand gone, his pride wounded deeper than flesh. When the guards at the gate finally recognized him beneath the grime and travel dust, their expressions flickered between shock and pity. It stung, that pity, worse than any insult. He was ushered inside, Brienne at his side, and the great doors of the keep swallowed them both. Inside, the corridors buzzed with rumour. Whispers swam through the air like insects. The Kingslayer is back. He's maimed. Cersei will weep. Cersei will rage. Cersei will not even look at him. No one approached him directly, not at first. The legendary White Knight was now a curiosity, a tragedy others observed from a distance. He climbed the familiar steps toward the Queen's Tower with uneven steps, each one echoing. His golden prosthetic hand, a cruel joke disguised as honour, glinted in the torchlight. He had no idea how she would see him now, for Cersei had always loved power, beauty, perfection. Would she still love a broken man? Cersei opened her chamber door at last, and for a moment, Jaime saw the relief in her face, raw and unguarded. She rushed into his arms, embracing him fiercely, pressing her head against his shoulder as if trying to confirm he was real. For a heartbeat, he felt whole again. But as she pulled back, her eyes dropped to the golden imitation of his missing hand, and something cold settled between them. She masked it with a smile. Cersei always masked things with smiles. "You took too long," she said. "I lost my hand," Jaime replied. "Yes," she answered quietly. "So I see." Her voice held no malice, yet no warmth either. Not the warmth he remembered, not the heat that had once bound them like a secret flame. And Jaime, for the first time since childhood, felt a flicker of insecurity within her gaze. A single truth struck him with brutal clarity. He had changed. She had not. The city had changed as well. Tyrion, once Hand of the King, and defender of King's Landing during the Battle of the Black Water, was now accused by Cersei of treason, of murder, of threatening the family. Cersei was convinced Tyrion had poisoned King Joffrey, her eldest son, Jaime's eldest son, at the wedding feast. News of Joffrey's death hit Jaime like a hammer. He had barely known his children beyond stolen glances and forbidden moments, yet the loss raked across him like claws. A boy he should have raised, should have loved openly, had died choking on his own tongue, while the realm laughed at Tyrion's downfall. When he visited Tyrion in his darkened cell, the brothers stared at each other through iron bars. Tyrion was thinner, sharp with bitterness, wounded by betrayal. Jaime felt guilt, love and regret swirled together, a mixture he could barely name. "You took your time," Tyrion said, though his voice shook with emotion. "I lost my hand," Jaime answered, as he had answered Cersei. "Yes," Tyrion said, "but you're still my brother." It was the closest thing to peace Jaime had felt since returning. Still, Cersei's venom grew stronger. Her grief for Joffrey curdled into vengeance. Her ambitions twisted into paranoia. She used their children as shields, as claims of power, as justification for cruelty. She whispered that Tyrion had killed their son and demanded Jaime avenge him. But Jaime, whose vows as Kingsguard bound him to serve the realm, whose love for Tyrion tugged at him like a tether, refused to accept her version of events without proof. Cersei's fury scorched him. Her kisses grew colder. Her touch became distant. Jaime felt her slipping away like sand through fingers. He threw himself into training, trying desperately to adapt to his new handicap. Bronn became his sparring partner, mocking him, slapping him, pushing him relentlessly. "You're slow," Bronn said. "You're weak. You're fighting like a girl who's never held a sword." Jaime fought back with gritted teeth, sweat soaking his shirt as he dodged clumsy strikes. The truth was undeniable. He was no longer the swordsman he had once been. But slowly, painfully, he learned to move again, to strike again, to survive again. Not with elegance, not with mastery, but with determination. Meanwhile, tensions in the city reached a breaking point. Tyrion's trial for regicide became a spectacle. Lies, half-truths, and manipulated testimonies paraded through the throne room. Cersei orchestrated the farce to ensure Tyrion's conviction. Jaime watched helplessly as their father, Tywin Lannister, oversaw the proceedings with cold precision. Tyrion was doomed from the start. When Oberyn Martell volunteered as Tyrion's champion, hopes flickered briefly, only to be extinguished in a spray of blood and shattered bone. The mountain crushed Oberyn's skull, and with it, any chance Tyrion had of freedom. Tyrion was condemned to die. Jaime could not let that happen. Late one night, he went to his father's chambers, ready to bargain. Tywin had always commanded obedience, but Jaime had learned hard truths in the Riverlands. He no longer feared the man who had shaped his life with cold hands. He offered Tywin a deal. Let Tyrion live, and Jaime would resign from the Kingsguard and become the heir Tywin always wanted. Tywin accepted, but Cersei, in a fit of rage, shattered the arrangement. She confessed to Tywin, loudly, coldly, that she and Jaime had been lovers for years, that the rumors were true, that Tywin's legacy was born of incest. Tywin called it a lie. Cersei called it justice. Jaime called it betrayal, though not of Tywin, but of himself. Cersei had thrown their secret into fire, not to save Tyrion, but to punish Jaime for refusing to obey her blindly. In her eyes, he should have been her sword, her shield, her instrument, not a man with conscience or divided loyalty. That same night, Jaime chose action. He freed Tyrion from his cell. In the dark corridors beneath the Red Keep, he told Tyrion to flee across the narrow sea. Their goodbye was strained at first, full of old wounds, but the bond between them resurfaced in the final moment when they embraced. "You were the only one," Tyrion said softly. "The only one who always treated me like a brother." "Go," Jaime replied, "before they find us." But Tyrion did not go straight to freedom. He went instead to Tywin's private chambers, and with a crossbow stolen from the tower above, he murdered their father on the privy, a grotesque, humiliating end for the most powerful man in the realm. The news shattered King's Landing like a dropped goblet. Tywin Lannister was dead. Tyrion had vanished. Cersei blamed Jaime for everything. She withdrew from him entirely, wrapping herself in ambition and paranoia. Jaime, for the first time in decades, stood completely alone. In the months that followed, he poured his energy into fulfilling the duties of Lord Commander. He restored discipline among the Kingsguard, re-examined their oaths, and sought to rebuild the Order's dignity. He tried to serve the realm rather than Cersei alone, but Cersei saw this as betrayal, another wedge driving them apart. Then word came of trouble in the Riverlands. The crown needed a Lannister envoy to restore order and reclaim control of the region. Jaime volunteered, partly to escape Cersei's suffocating fury, partly to escape the memory of his father's corpse, partly to escape the whispers that followed him in every corridor, but also, though he did not yet understand it, to follow a path he had begun at Harrenhal, a path toward becoming a man worthy of the vows he once abandoned. He rode out from King's Landing with determination, with a new understanding of himself, and with a shifting sense of purpose. Fragile, uncertain, but real. And in the distance, smoke curled over the Riverlands once more, calling him back toward the war-torn lands where he had first been broken, and where he might yet remake himself. The Riverlands had always been fertile, a quilt of farmlands and winding rivers feeding the heart of Westeros. But when Jaime rode north from King's Landing with a modest escort of Lannister men, he found a wasteland instead. Villages smouldered, fields lay trampled and abandoned, smoke drifted like pale ghosts across the horizon. War had not merely scarred the Riverlands, it had hollowed them out. Every charred farmhouse and gutted inn whispered of the chaos unleashed by both Stark and Lannister banners. Jaime travelled slowly, deliberately, wearing his white cloak despite the mud and heat. Once, it had been a symbol of prestige. Now, it felt like thin armour against the contempt of the realm. He passed small folk who glared at him, who whispered Kingslayer as if it were a curse. He met bands of broken men who recognized him only as a prize to ransom or kill. His golden hand glinted in sunlight, a reminder of the humiliation he carried with him always. He felt strangely at ease among these ruins. The devastation suited him, matched the ruin he carried within himself. His world had shattered. Cersei's mistrust, his father's death by the hand of the brother he saved, his own lost identity. Yet something new stirred beneath those ruins, a quiet ember of purpose that had taken root since Harrenhal. he was riding north not as Cersei's creature, nor as Tywin's heir, but as a man seeking to fulfill the responsibilities of his office and perhaps reclaim a piece of honor he had long abandoned. At the crossroads where armies had once clashed, Jaime's party was approached by ravens and messengers who brought grim tidings. The Riverlands were not merely unstable, they were fracturing. Riverrun, once the seat of House Tully, was held by the Blackfish, Sir Brynden Tully, who refused every term of surrender. The Freys, bitter over the realm's disgust at their treachery at the Red Wedding, demanded Lannister aid in besieging Riverrun, but lacked both competence and legitimacy. The small folk despised them. The Riverlords resisted them. Only Tywin's death had kept open rebellion at bay, and with the old lion gone, the realm was beginning to unravel. Jaime pressed onward, refusing to be deterred. His first significant stop was Darry, a castle held by a loyal Lannister garrison, but surrounded by a countryside rife with banditry. He met with Sir Adam Marbrand, one of the few commanders he respected. Marbrand gave him a clearer picture of the chaos. Broken men driven by hunger and rage roamed freely. Remnants of the Brotherhood without banners attacked supply roads, and Frey forces alienated every house they encountered. If the Riverlands were to be pacified, someone needed to bring discipline and restraint. Jaime's arrival at the Frey encampment outside Riverrun was greeted with nervous bows and thin smiles. The Freys, though technically allies, had little love for him. They feared him, respected his name, and loathed his judgments. They led him to their command tent, where a dozen Frey lords argued loudly over strategy. When Jaime entered, the argument stalled into silence. He surveyed them. Corpulent Sir Emmon Frey, who claimed Riverrun by marriage. Black Walder, lean and cruel-eyed. Lothar Frey, known as Lothar the Lame, and several lesser kin. They looked to Jaime expecting a conqueror, but he spoke calmly. "Your siege has accomplished nothing," he said bluntly. "You starve yourselves more efficiently than you starve the castle." The Freys sputtered in protest. They argued that Brynden Tully refused all terms, that their army needed more time, more pressure, more cruelty. Jaime listened for a moment, then raised his golden hand, and the tent fell silent again. His voice, calm but sharp, cut through their excuses. "You want Riverrun taken? Then you will do as I say." The Freys obeyed, not because they believed in him, but because they feared what defiance might cost. Jaime spent the next days observing the siege lines, inspecting trenches, speaking with scouts, and studying the castle's defences. Riverrun was formidable, surrounded by water on three sides, its walls thick, its garrison loyal to the last. Force alone would not break it. The Freys had hoped starvation might weaken the defenders, but Brynden Tully had anticipated the siege and stored provisions well. Jaime understood that the key to victory was not brute strength, but leverage. Before acting, he sought an audience with Edmure Tully, the rightful lord of Riverrun, now a prisoner of the Freys. Edmure was weary, pale, and trembling with anger when Jaime entered his tent. The two men regarded each other in heavy silence before Jaime spoke quietly. "You are the lawful lord of this castle," he said. "Brynden Tully holds it, but he cannot hold it forever. You can end this peacefully." Edmure spat back accusations of the Red Wedding, of Lannister treachery, of Robb Stark's murder. Jaime listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. Once, such insults would have provoked fury. Now, he absorbed them calmly. "I am not here to debate the past," Jaime said when Edmure's voice broke from emotion. "I am here to end bloodshed. You will order Riverrun's surrender." Edmure refused. Jaime leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I will not harm your wife. I will not harm your unborn child. But if you force my hand, the Freys will not show mercy, and I cannot protect them if you defy me." It was not a threat delivered with malice, but with deadly clarity. Edmure understood. He agreed, reluctantly, bitterly, to do as Jaime commanded. Before dawn, escorted by a small Lannister guard, Edmure rode alone to the gates of Riverrun. The defenders saw their rightful lord, heard his orders, and hesitated, but obedience ran in the Tully blood. The gates opened. Brynden Tully refused surrender. He vanished into the night, escaping the castle before the Freys could capture him. Jaime allowed him to flee. He admired the Blackfish too much to see him executed by the Freys, and he respected valor even in an enemy. Riverrun fell without bloodshed. The Freys were both triumphant and resentful. They had wanted carnage. They had wanted to break the Tullys with humiliation. Instead, Jaime delivered them a clean victory. It was efficient, honorable by comparison, and had preserved countless lives. The Freys did not thank him, but they obeyed, and that was enough. With Riverrun secured, Jaime travelled through the surrounding lands to bring remaining rebellious houses back into line. He sought no brutality, preferring negotiation to violence. He met with the Mallisters, the Blackwoods, the Vances, the Mootons, some hostile, some weary, all defeated. He treated them with a level of respect unusual for a Lannister commander, earning grudging acknowledgement. Rumours of his restraint spread quietly. The Kingslayer spares villages. The lion listens. He's not what he once was. Jaime ignored the whispers, yet they warmed something deep within him, something long dormant. But alongside this faint hope came darker news. Messages from King's Landing that Cersei's rule was becoming volatile. Her alliances were fracturing, her decisions erratic. She wrote to Jaime frequently, demanding he return at once to be her shield, her sword, her lover, her everything. Instead, he stayed in the Riverlands to finish his task. He sent her careful replies, each one shorter than the last. Something had fractured between them. A crack formed in the shadow of his lost hand, in the truth he'd revealed to Brienne, in the betrayal she had dealt Tyrion. He was beginning to see her clearly, and he no longer knew if he loved what he saw. But another reason kept him in the Riverlands, hidden even from himself. He was searching for reports of Brienne of Tarth. He heard rumours, a tall woman in armour, a sapphire sword, a lady knight guarding the weak. He asked questions subtly, masking his interest behind duty. When he learned she had been seen near Maidenpool serving with a small group of travellers, he altered his route. He told his men it was strategic reconnaissance. In truth, he simply wanted to see her again. He found Brienne unexpectedly in the ruins of Pennytree, standing between a group of helpless villagers and a band of outlaws. Jaime intervened before bloodshed erupted, And for a moment, as he and Brienne locked eyes, the world stilled. She had changed too. She was harder, more resolute. But when she looked at Jaime's golden hand, her eyes softened, not in pity, but in shared understanding. They spoke privately. She told him of her search for Sansa Stark, who had vanished after escaping King's Landing. Jaime listened, torn between protecting his sister's secrets and fulfilling the promise he had once made to Catelyn Stark. In the end, he gave Brienne a Valyrian steel sword, the reforged steel of ice, the Stark greatsword, renaming it Oathkeeper. For your quest, he said, for your honor. And what of yours? Brienne asked softly. He had no answer. They parted again, this time willingly, knowing their paths might cross once more. As Brienne rode into the dusk, with Podrick Payne at her side, Jaime felt a strange ache in his chest, one that had nothing to do with loss or humiliation. It was the ache of possibility, but he did not dwell on it. He had duty still, and he pushed onward, unaware that the Riverlands would be the last place he felt a sense of clarity before the world plunged into wildfire and terror. It was on the road to Raventree Hall that the final message arrived. A raven bearing the royal seal. The parchment smelled of smoke and wax, and the words inside chilled him to the bone. Cersei had been imprisoned by the Faith, charged with adultery, treason, and incest. The High Sparrow demanded she confess or prove her innocence through trial. And she called for Jaime, not as a brother, not as a lover, but as her champion. Jaime stared at the message long after the raven flew away. His hand, the real hand, the one he had left, trembled. Cersei was asking him to fight for her, to kill for her, to risk everything for her. But the man who read that letter was no longer the boy who once believed they were two halves of a whole. He had changed. The Riverlands had changed him. Brienne had changed him. His own suffering had carved out truths he could no longer ignore. He folded the letter slowly, the words echoing in his mind. And somewhere within that echo, a realization took form. Jaime Lannister no longer knew whether he wanted to save her, but duty, history, and love, twisted and frail, still bound him to the fate that awaited in King's Landing. And the lion turned his horse south. The raven's message weighed heavier than plate armor in Jaime's hand. As the wind rustled through the trees of the Riverlands, he read Cersei's words again and again, a plea, a command, a desperate confession masked as a summons. I need you, come to me, be my champion. He folded the letter slowly, as though pressing it shut would still his rising turmoil. Cersei had never been one to beg, not even in their youth, when pride ran through her veins like wildfire. She had always believed herself untouchable, the Golden Queen, the lioness whose claws no man could dull. Yet now she was imprisoned by the faith of the Seven, stripped of finery, stripped of dignity, stripped of power. And she wanted Jaime to cross half the realm, to kill a man in her name. He mounted his horse with deliberate movements, the golden hand cold against the reins. His escort watched him silently, awaiting orders. Jaime stared southward toward King's Landing, where lies had become law, and Cersei's enemies sharpened their blades. Duty pulled him in that direction. History pulled him. Habit pulled him. But something else, something quieter, held him back. As he began the long journey, the lands around him shifted from ruin to emptiness. The war was over, but its scars remained. Broken trees, burned villages, pits of shallow graves. For years, Jaime had believed he understood war, but now, stripped of arrogance, he saw its ruin clearly. And he wondered if returning to Cersei meant returning to the man he used to be. A man who killed without questioning, obeyed without thinking, loved without seeing. Each night, as he camped with his men under the dim glow of lanterns, Jaime reread Cersei's letter. At times, he felt that old pull, the bond forged in shadows and secrets. At others, he felt only fatigue. The woman he loved had become a stranger, yet the child they had been together still lingered. When he neared Maidenpool, reports reached him that Brienne of Tarth had been seen again, following some rumour of Sansa Stark in the eastern countryside. The news twisted something inside him. Should he seek her? Should he ride off the road, chase the faint hope of honour, of redemption, of something untainted by blood? He stayed his course. Southward he rode, though each mile weighed heavier. As he approached King's Landing, news of Cersei's downfall spread like wildfire. The High Sparrow, a man of ragged robes and iron convictions, had risen from the gutters to challenge the Queen. He wielded piety the way Tywin had wielded armies, and the small folk adored him. Cersei had underestimated him, used him, and believed she could control the faith militant resurrected under her authority. Instead, they had turned on her. Jaime recalled the moment he last saw Cersei in her tower, proud and untouchable. Now, that same confidence had thrown her into a cell beneath the great sept, clad not in silk but in shame. By the time he reached the city gates, dusk had fallen. The guards saluted him stiffly, eyes flickering to the golden hand, to the weariness etched into his face. Within the Red Keep's walls, whispers swelled. Servants bowed deeply, but spoke of scandal with hushed urgency. No one mourned Cersei's humiliation, not openly. Jaime went first to his chambers to wash away the dust of travel, though he felt just as stained within. When he looked into the mirror, he hardly recognized the man staring back. The golden hand gleamed unnaturally, mocking him. He lifted his left hand to his face, tracing the lines of exhaustion. He wondered silently, what will she see when she looks at me? No answer came. He made his way to the High Sparrow's audience hall the next morning. It was a stark place, stripped of gold and ornament, filled instead with bare stone and devout men, whose eyes judged every breath he took. The High Sparrow stood at the centre, serene and unyielding. When Jaime approached, the man bowed his head gently, as if greeting a pilgrim rather than a knight. "You see Queen Cersei," the High Sparrow said. "My sister," Jaime replied, though the word sister carried a depth only he understood. "Your sister has sinned," the High Sparrow continued. "She has confessed to deceit, to adultery." "Confessed under threat," Jaime snapped. "Confession is confession. We did not force her to speak. The gods compelled her." Jaime's jaw tightened, anger rising. "What do you want from her?" he demanded. "Repentance," the High Sparrow answered calmly. "Humility, atonement." "And for a trial," Jaime pressed. "She has the right to a champion." The High Sparrow smiled faintly. "Yes, and she will have one if she chooses. But tell me," said Jaime, Will you be that champion? Will you kill in the name of the gods for a woman who has stained the realm with lies? The words cut deeper than any blade. Jaime felt exposed. The room seemed to close around him. The High Sparrow saw his hesitation. He dismissed Jaime with a gentle nod, a gesture of victory cloaked in piety. When Jaime left the hall, he felt hollow. That night, he visited the chamber where Cersei was held under guard. They allowed him a moment alone. She rose when he entered, gaunt and pale, her pride chipped but not broken. The sight of her stirred something ancient inside him. Loyalty, love, regret. Jaime, she breathed. He stepped closer. They say you confessed. Her eyes flashed. I confessed what I had to. For us. For Tommen. For survival. You want me to fight for you? She nodded, her gaze fierce. You are my sword, Jaime. You always have been. He felt those words like a chain tightening around his throat. He reached out instinctively, but the golden hand touched her shoulder instead of warm flesh. She stiffened. That tiny recoil told him more than any speech could. She loved the memory of him. She loved the idea of him. But this man, broken, humbled, was not the knight she wanted. Still, she cupped his face with trembling hands. Fight for me, she whispered. Kill for me. Win for me. Jaime swallowed hard. Cersei, But he never finished the sentence. Before dawn, the decision was made for him. The High Sparrow announced that Cersei had chosen trial by faith, not trial by combat. There would be no champion. She would walk the steps of atonement instead. When Jaime heard the proclamation, he felt a sudden, sickening mix of relief and dread. He would not have to kill for her, but he would have to watch her be broken publicly. The city gathered along the streets leading from the Great Sept to the Red Keep. Every balcony overflowed with onlookers eager for spectacle. Midnight bells tolled as Cersei stepped forward, barefoot and naked save for her cropped hair and the weight of the crowd's hatred. Jaime watched from the Red Keep's inner gate, hidden from sight. He could not bear to see her humiliation, but he could not bear to look away. She walked slowly, each step a punishment. Small folk hurled insults, rotten fruit, spit. They screamed for justice, for vengeance, for her suffering. Cersei, who had once commanded kings, now trembled under their rage. Jaime felt helpless. Rage welled inside him. Not the violent fury of youth, but a cold ache. He remembered the tower in Winterfell, the lies they told together, the children they had never been allowed to acknowledge. He remembered her fierce pride, her unbreakable will. No one deserved this, not even Cersei. When she collapsed near the end of the path, sobbing on the stones, Jaime's breath caught. For a moment, he stepped forward, but armored guards crowded around her, shielding her, lifting her, taking her inside. He could do nothing. In the shadow of the keep, he realized something painful. He loved her, but he no longer knew who she was, and he no longer knew who he was when he stood beside her. After her atonement, Cersei retreated into silence. Her eyes grew colder, her words shorter, her ambition sharper than ever. She no longer sought Jaime's touch. She sought power, revenge, fire. She spoke of eliminating the faith, of destroying every enemy, of ruling through fear and force. The woman who had walked naked through the streets now wore her pride like armor. But something inside her had cracked beyond repair. Cersei wanted Jaime to be her instrument again, her champion, her killer. But Jaime found himself thinking more often of Brienne, of their shared truth in Harrenhal, of Oathkeeper shining like a promise between them. Brienne believed in him in a way Cersei never had, not for what he had been, but for what he could be. For the first time since boyhood, Jaime questioned the path laid before him. He had been shaped by love and duty and lies and pain, but now he could choose. As winter crept southward and ravens whispered of dangers rising in the north, King's Landing smouldered with tension. Tommen, too young and gentle for the throne, was caught between mother and faith. The small council whispered of rebellion. The faith militant grew bolder, and Cersei sharpened her plans like knives. Through it all, Jaime remained at her side physically, but not in spirit. Every day he felt the widening gulf between them. He had saved a city once and been cursed for it. He had killed for love and lost himself. He had lost his hand and found, to his surprise, a flicker of honor. And so, in the quiet hours before dawn, as the Red Keep slept uneasily, Jaime Lannister began to understand. He was no longer Cersei's shadow, no longer Tywin's heir in chains of expectation, no longer the gilded sword of the Kingsguard. He was something else entirely, something unfinished, something uncertain, something free. Winter was coming, and Jaime would have to decide once and for all what kind of man he intended to be. The days following Cersei's atonement unfolded like the slow tightening of a noose around King's Landing. Every corridor in the Red Keep hummed with tension. Every whispered conversation carried the weight of treason or fear. The faith militant patrolled with newfound authority, emboldened by the High Sparrow's piety and the small folk's adoration. Meanwhile, Cersei locked herself within her chambers, a lioness nursing wounds no maester could mend. Jaime moved through this fractured world like a ghost. People stepped aside when he approached, not out of respect but caution. The Kingslayer, the Queen's lover, the maimed knight whose reputation had become a legend of contradictions. They saw him and whispered of father murder, brother betrayal, forbidden love. He heard the rumors, but did not bother refuting them. A lifetime spent correcting lies had taught him that truth mattered little in the court of public opinion. Yet he could not ignore the rot spreading through the city. Tommen, their young king, their son, wore the crown like a burden carved of sorrow. He spent his days torn between Cersei's fury and the High Sparrow's soft-spoken righteousness. The boy needed guidance, a steady hand, a father. But Jaime was forbidden from claiming that role. He could only watch helplessly as Tommen slipped further into confusion. One morning, summoned to the small council chamber, Jaime entered to find Kevan Lannister presiding with the grim demeanor of a man who believed his own kin had doomed the realm. Kevan greeted Jaime with the strained courtesy of relatives forced into alliance by blood rather than affection. "We must stabilize the city," Kevan said. "Cersei's mistakes have weakened us." "These are not merely mistakes," Grand Maester Pycelle added, stroking his beard. "They are disasters." Jaime tensed. "Mind your tongue." Pycelle faltered under the sharpness of his tone, but Kevin continued. Your sister has made enemies of the faith. She has alienated allies. She has turned the throne into a spectacle. Jaime bristled. She was humiliated, tormented. She brought the Sparrows into power. Kevin cut him off. And now they rule us. The bitter truth stung. Jaime had defended her all his life, even when she was wrong, even when the realm paid the price. But he could not deny what she had unleashed. The city was a powder keg waiting for a spark. The council spoke of treaties, negotiations, strategies. Jaime listened, detached. Their plans were too cautious, too political, too fearful of public sentiment. He understood something they did not. Faith fanatics could not be tamed with treaties. They believed the gods stood behind them, and such belief was more dangerous than wildfire. But it was not his place to lead, not anymore. As the meeting disbanded, Kevin pulled him aside. Jaime, he said, voice softer, you must distance yourself from her, for your sake, for the realm's. Jaime stared at him, feeling something cold bloom in his chest. Distance himself from Cersei. The thought was unimaginable once. Now, it felt like a truth he had known, but refused to accept. She needs me, Jaime replied. She needs salvation, Kevin said quietly. Not a shield. Those words echoed long after Jaime left the chamber. Though summoned daily by Cersei, Jaime found himself drifting further emotionally from her. She spoke with sharp intensity about vengeance, about eliminating the faith, about bending Tommen to her will. But Jaime saw the fear behind her eyes, the cracks in her mask. She had been broken by shame and rebuilt by rage. There was no room left for tenderness, no room left for doubt, no room left for him. He could no longer reach her. In the nights that followed, Jaime found himself sleepless. He walked the Red Keep's ramparts alone, listening to the restless city below. Sometimes he climbed to the White Sword Tower, once a sanctuary of honor, now a reminder of oaths broken and unfulfilled. He sat beside the white book that chronicled the deeds of the Kingsguard and read the entries that described him. Jaime Lannister, sworn sword at 17, killer of Heiress 2, defender of none. An empty life summarized in ink. He turned the pages and wondered what legacy he would leave behind. Would he be remembered as a traitor, a lover, a murderer, a cripple? He traced the blank space beneath his name and felt something twist inside him. Could he write a different ending? That question haunted him. When ravens arrived from the Riverlands, bearing seals he did not expect, Jaime's internal struggle deepened. Reports of Brienne surfaced again. Sightings of a tall woman with a Valyrian blade. Stories of her defending small folk from bandits. Rumors of her pursuit of Sansa Stark. Jaime read each accounted with a mixture of pride and concern. Brienne had become a myth in the Riverlands, a lone knight who embodied everything knighthood ought to be. Part of him longed to ride to her, to see Oathkeeper in her hands, to know she was alive and thriving. Part of him feared it, for Brienne represented a path he did not know how to walk, a path of honor, duty, truth, a path without Cersei, without lies, without moral compromise. He was not certain he was strong enough for that path, but fate intervened. One morning, as chill winds swept the city, A raven arrived bearing Brienne's own handwriting. A single sentence. I have found Sansa Stark. Jaime's heart stopped. The letter continued. Brienne requested his presence at a secluded location outside King's Landing, where she claimed to be hiding Sansa from enemies seeking her capture. Brienne admitted her fear of Lannister reprisals should she appear openly in the capital. She asked Jaime to come alone. He told no one, not Kevin, not the council, not Cersei. Under cloak of night, Jaime left the Red Keep with only one trusted squire. They rode silently beyond the city walls, following the directions Brienne had written. As moonlight silvered the road, Jaime rehearsed what he would say if Sansa was truly found, what he would offer, what he would apologize for, how he would honor Catelyn Stark's last wish. Hours later, he reached the appointed clearing and found no Sansa, only Brienne, and she looked different. Her expression was conflicted, her armor dusty, her eyes full of urgency and guilt. Jaime, she said, voice trembling. He stepped closer, relief blooming. Brienne, thank the gods. But she lifted a trembling hand. I'm sorry, she whispered. So sorry. Shadows moved behind her. A black shape stepped into moonlight. The hound's brutish silhouette, or something like it. Men appeared from the trees, and Jaime, stunned, realized this was no accident. No secret mission, no reunion. It was a trap. Brienne forced the words out, tears gathering in her eyes. I had no choice. They have her. They have Sansa. They said they would kill the girl unless I brought you. Jaime froze. This was not betrayal. This was desperation. Brienne's honor, weaponized against her. Before he could speak, sword points closed around him. His squire screamed. Jaime drew his blade out of instinct, but his left-handed skill was meager, clumsy. Steel flashed. His squire fell. Jaime staggered. Brienne cried out, trying to intervene, torn between duty and survival. Then everything erupted. Flames streaked across the sky. Shouts echoed. Hooves thundered. A force descended upon the encampment. Not enemies, but wildlings, or riverfolk, or something else altogether. Chaos consumed the clearing. Brienne seized Jaime's arm, dragging him toward the woods. Run! He obeyed. Behind them, men screamed. Steel clashed. The trap dissolved into carnage. When they reached the dark safety of the forest, they collapsed, panting. Jaime stared at her, breath ragged. Brienne, you lured me. I had no choice, she whispered, but I would never let them kill you. He saw the truth in her eyes, the agony of a woman torn between oaths she could not reconcile. Jaime reached for her hand. She did not pull away. You should have trusted me, he said softly. I did, she replied, and that is why they tried to use me against you. They sat together in silence, trembling with exhaustion and relief. For a moment, the world shrank to two battered souls beneath a canopy of winter stars. Then Brienne rose. We must part. If they still hunt us, we endanger each other. Will I see you again? He asked. She hesitated. I hope so. She disappeared into the trees, leaving Jaime alone with only moonlight for company. He returned to King's Landing changed once more, torn between two worlds, two women, two visions of himself. Cersei demanded vengeance and loyalty. Brienne had offered truth and trust. But winter marched southward, and the winds carried news of new threats. The north stirred with the dead, the south festered with politics, and King's Landing, fragile, volatile, seemed ready to explode. Jaime lay awake each night, staring at the ceiling, unable to silence a single terrifying question. Can a man with a past like mine choose who he becomes? He did not know the answer, but the realm would soon force him to find one. The morning after Jaime returned from the forest clearing, King's Landing felt strangely still, as if the city sensed a storm forming beyond human sight. The air carried the cold bite of approaching winter, and the fog rising off Blackwater Bay seemed thicker than usual, like breath exhaled by the gods themselves over a realm on the brink of unravelling. Jaime rode through the Red Keep's gates quietly, avoiding the main guard stations and slipping into the barracks entrance used by off-duty soldiers. He wanted no attention, no questions. The encounter with Brienne had carved through him, leaving an ache he could not name. She had deceived him, yet she had protected him. She had been used as bait, yet she resisted the final cruelty. She had chosen him even when pushed to betray him. There were too many contradictions swirling inside him. Contradictions that he could not untangle, not while the city pressed down on him like a stone lid over a crypt. His squire's absence was noticed immediately. Told that the young man had fallen to bandits, the soldiers nodded soberly, accustomed to death. Jaime said little. The lie tasted foul, but the truth, the trap, the chaos, would only raise suspicion, and suspicion was a luxury he could not afford. When he reached his chambers, he removed his armor piece by piece, each plate dropping to the floor with the sound of finality. He washed the dirt from his face and stared into the polished steel mirror. The reflection that looked back at him was not the golden knight of his youth, nor the broken captive of the Riverlands. It was something in between, a man suspended on a knife's edge between past and future, between love and honor, between destruction and redemption. A man who no longer knew where he belonged. For the next several days, King's Landing moved around him like a living organism slowly devouring itself. Jaime Lannister attempted to restore order through administrative reforms, bringing stability with a firm but measured hand. Tommen clung more tightly to the High Sparrow, who spoke to him with the gentle menace of a man convinced the gods whispered in his ear. And Cersei was different. Jaime saw her only once in those days, during a brief council gathering in the Tower of the Hand. She appeared wearing black embroidered silk, her blonde hair cropped short from the Atonement Walk, her green eyes cold but burning. She was beautiful still, in the way wildfire is beautiful, hypnotic, consuming, deadly. She sat straight-backed with a composure so brittle Jaime feared touching her might cause her to shatter. When their eyes met, something passed between them. Recognition, longing, and a distance that had never existed before. After the meeting, she approached him in a private corridor overlooking the city. "You were gone longer than I expected," she said, voice soft yet hard as ice. "I had business in the Riverlands," Jaime replied. "And with her?" Cersei asked, though she did not speak Brienne's name. She did not need to. Jaime hesitated. She was hunting Stark girls. I gave her Oathkeeper. Nothing more. Nothing more. Cersei repeated the words with a quiet intensity. I see. He wanted to reach for her then, to close the widening gap with something familiar. A touch, a whispered joke, a shared memory. But the golden hand weighed him down, its cold gleam a reminder of every choice that had driven them apart. Cersei, he said, we need to think carefully. The faith grows stronger. Tommen. Our son is weak, she snapped. He listens to that barefoot fanatic as if he were a father. He forgets who truly loves him. Jaime felt the blow of those words. He had never been allowed to claim fatherhood. He had never been permitted to guide Joffrey, to protect Myrcella, to comfort Tommen. He had sacrificed the truth of his children for Cersei's ambitions, and they had paid the price. We cannot fight everyone, Jaime said quietly. Not the faith, not the Tyrells, not the Crown's enemies. We? Cersei cut him off. Do not speak of we unless you stand with me. Will you? Will you stand by me, Jaime? Will you be the sword that cuts my enemies down? Or will you run to that giant woman with your precious Oathkeeper? The cruelty struck deeper than any blade. For a moment, Jaime felt anger rise, fierce, sharp, years deep. But then he saw the fear behind Cersei's fury, the terror of a woman stripped of dignity and clinging to the only weapons she had left. He softened. Cersei, I'm here. But even as he said it, he felt the lie tremble inside him. She placed her hand on his cheek, the left side, not the golden right, and whispered, Don't leave me again. He said nothing, and that silence became another crack in the foundation beneath them. Weeks passed. Winter swept closer, though snow had not yet touched the capital. Supplies dwindled, crime increased. The faith intensified its grip. Kevan worked tirelessly to restore stability, but he was undermined at every turn by factions loyal to Cersei, to the faith, or to chaos itself. Jaime remained Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, but his days felt hollow. The white cloak weighed heavily, a constant reminder of vows broken and promises unfulfilled. He trained with his left hand, improving slowly, but he would never be the swordsman he once was. He visited Tommen often, though always secretly, careful never to speak as a father. He offered the boy gentle advice, reassurances. Tommen listened eagerly, but always returned to the High Sparrow for final guidance. It tore at Jaime, but he swallowed the pain. He had spent a lifetime swallowing pain. Then came the night everything changed. Jaime was awakened before dawn by shouts, by the crackle of flames, by bells tolling wildly. He rushed to the ramparts, still pulling on his cloak. From the eastern wall of the Red Keep, he saw a blaze devouring the great sept of Baelor, a pillar of emerald fire rising into the sky like the wrath of dragons. Wildfire. He watched helplessly as the sept collapsed inward, its grey dome exploding into molten fragments. The towers fell. The crowd outside was incinerated, and the smoke twisted upward into the shape of a monstrous lion made of flames. Or perhaps that was only his mind imposing meaning on catastrophe. Hundreds died, thousands. The screams were swallowed by the roar of burning stone. But worst of all, Marguerite Tyrell, Loras Tyrell, the High Sparrow, the entire faith leadership, dozens of nobles, hundreds of small folk, all gone in an instant. Jaime knew the culprit before anyone spoke a word. Cersei. He returned to the Red Keep at once, riding through streets coated with ash and stunned silence. When he reached the throne room, The sight that greeted him hollowed him out entirely. Cersei sat upon the Iron Throne, robed in black velvet, crowned with cold metal shaped like a sharpened halo. Her posture was regal, unflinching. Her eyes burned not with fear now, but with something far more dangerous, triumph. Qyburn stood beside her like a shadow. At the foot of the throne, kneeling and trembling before her, was Tommen's small crown, untouched, cold, empty. Tommen had thrown himself from the window. Jaime staggered backward, feeling the world tilt. His vision blurred, his breath turned to ice. His son, their last child, gone by his own hand. Cersei had not even wept. As he approached the throne, their eyes met. She looked at him with a calm so unnatural it terrified him. "Our children are gone," he whispered. The words felt like glass in his throat. "Yes," she said. "Now we must be strong." He stared at her, truly stared, and for the first time in their lives, he could not find the woman he had loved in the girl he had grown up beside. She had become something else entirely, something hardened by grief, ambition and terror, something unrecognizable. He wanted to scream, to weep, to fall to his knees, to beg her to tell him she hadn't meant for this. But she only said, "I will rule the 7 kingdoms. Stand beside me, Jaime, as you always have." The wildfire's green glow still flickered behind his eyes. The screams of the dying echoed. His son's final despair knifed through him. And in that moment, something inside Jaime broke. Not with violence, not with hatred, but with truth. He bowed his head, but not in fealty, in resignation. The path before him had become clear. A lion cannot stay in a burning city forever, not when the fire comes from the lioness herself. That night, long after the coronation torches flickered out, Jaime slipped from the Red Keep in full armor. He left behind the gilded halls, the throne room, the false promises, and the ashes of the life he had wasted. He rode north, toward winter, toward war, toward redemption, toward the only path not carved by Cersei or Tywin or fate, toward the man he might yet become. If the gods allowed him the time. He did not know where the road would lead. He did not know whether he would die fighting the dead or the living. He did not know whether he would see Brienne again. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Jaime Lannister was finally choosing his own story.